Greetings. Thank you for joining us for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Systems for Action Research in Progress webinar. We're glad that you're with us today, and we have some very exciting new research to share as part of the Systems for Action research program. My name is Glenn Mays. I'm a professor at the University of Colorado School of Public Health, and I lead the National Program Office for the Systems for Action Research Program. Some of you may be new to the program, maybe a little bit less familiar with what we do. Systems for Action is a signature research program of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and we study ways of better aligning and connecting medical, social, and public health systems with the goal of improving population health and advancing health equity. We support studies really around the country, testing a variety of mechanisms for connecting, integrating, aligning medical, social, and public health delivery and financing systems. Wide variety of alignment strategies being used, wide variety of methods used to study these alignment strategies, to understand how they work, to understand the impact that they have on health and health equity across the country. For those of you who may want to learn more about our program, I encourage you to go on our website at systemsforaction.org. You can find more information about all of the studies that are currently underway, more than 20 studies that we're supporting now across the country. You will also find information about our funding opportunity that is actually open right now. We are soliciting proposals for the next wave of studies to be supported through Systems for Action. So if you have an innovative idea for how to better connect medical, social, and public health systems, and have a way of rigorously studying that idea to understand the implementation and the impact of that strategy, we would love to get a proposal from you. Proposals are due November 6th, so you still got a little bit of time. Again, you can access the funding opportunity description and more information on the Systems for Action website, as well as access frequently asked questions. You can view webinars that we've held over the last couple of months describing the opportunity in greater detail. So again, systemsforaction.org. This webinar is a webinar we hold twice a month generally, featuring one of our studies that are supported through Systems for Action. It's a chance to check in on the study and understand what they're learning so far. This is a research in progress webinar. So in general, you're going to be hearing from research teams that are just in the process of implementing their study and learning as they go. And we feature studies kind of across the full life cycle from very early stages of research to to the end stages of having final findings and thinking about translating those findings into policy and practice. The research team we're going to hear from today is more at the early stage of their study. This is a project, one of our newest projects that started up earlier this year in 2019. Very excited about this study. Research team based in Texas, studying an alignment mechanism based in Texas with collaborators in other parts of the country as well. Focusing on justice-involved populations and testing a very innovative strategy for aligning health and social services for that population. Today we're going to hear from a few members of this collaborative research team leading this work. Including Dr. George Nafal, who is an assistant research scientist at the Public Policy Research Institute based at Texas A&M University. He's also a research fellow at IZA, Institute of Labor Economics, very prominent international labor economics group, as well as a visiting science at the Center for Outcomes Research at the Houston Methodist Health System. He's got a wealth of expertise in health economics, labor economics, has worked domestically and internationally, and as well as in the criminal justice and public health arenas. We'll also be hearing from Emily Nazer, who is a project director in the Public Policy Research Institute there at Texas A&M. She's got a long record of research experience collaborating on projects in a range of disciplines. Very much an interdisciplinary researcher, including public health, education, and criminal justice. She uses mixed methods in a lot of her work to understand implementation and impact of programs, and being able to develop best practice recommendations for stakeholders in these areas. We'll also be hearing from Renee Danzer, who is a scholar at the Access to Justice Lab at Harvard Law School at Harvard University, up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She is an expert in justice system operations, pressures on the justice system, and implementing research projects to understand justice system operations and effects. She's done a lot of work in her and her colleagues in developing methods to incorporate rigorous research approaches into justice systems, and the goal of improving access to justice. She's got also has expertise in court management and nonprofit leadership experiences. We'll also be hearing as a kind of reactor and discussant today from Elizabeth Henneke, who serves on the Juvenile Council for the State Bar of Texas, as well as serving on the Federal Advisory Committee on Juvenile Justice, and as well as a number of other state and national advisory bodies dealing with criminal justice, juvenile justice, and mental health. She has a wide range of expertise in these issues of law, justice, juvenile justice issues. Also has academic appointments and roles as well, including work at the University of Texas National Security and Human Rights Clinic, and also served as a clinical teaching fellow at the University of Southern California, Gould Institute of Law. So we have a very experienced multidisciplinary panel today of collaborators to share what they're learning so far about this very innovative project. So with that, let me turn it over, I think, to George, who's going to start us off.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for having us today. We're very excited to present our research in progress. And I speak on behalf of both the research and program teams that we are very excited to share with you what we've done so far in our project. We're finishing the planning phase. So today we will present some of the study design and also discuss some of our objectives. Before moving forward, I'm going to mention a couple of the research team members who could not be with us today. Dr. Jim Greiner, who is a nationally recognized leader in empirical legal studies, specifically in regards to a randomized control trial. He actually leads the Access to Justice Lab at the Harvard Law School, and the lab focuses mainly on designing and running randomized control trials, specifically in criminal justice. And Vanessa Schick, who is a faculty member at the University of Texas Health Science Center. She's a social psychologist and a subject matter expert on dealing with vulnerable communities, and she'll be working with Emily on the public health side of the project. Oh, sorry about that. Now, before we go through some of the details, I thought it would be a good idea to discuss some of the context and motivation behind the study. So the current criminal justice in Texas, but also in other states, is failing emerging adults. And we define emerging adults as those who are between 17 and 24 years old. Just to give a quick example, emerging adults make up about 11% of the population in Texas, but yet account for about 30 or 1/3 of all arrests. The main reason behind this is that there are distinct health needs that are being ignored. These include substance abuse, co-occurring disorders, emotional, and other physical trauma. In other terms, really, underlying factors focusing on push these individuals to engage in criminal behavior. These underlying factors are not being addressed by the current criminal justice system. Without addressing, obviously, the root cause, emerging adults will interact with the criminal justice at a high rate and will keep basically coming back. Just to give a sense of how high this rate, about 75% of justice involved emerging adults recidivate, and that's the highest short-term recidivism rate across of any age group. And the probation revocation of this group is 3 times higher than other adults. Now, the Transformative Justice Program, TJ, offers a multidimensional intervention to reduce recidivism and improve health outcomes. So in other sense, this program offers a unique and a different perspective than the current criminal justice. This leads us, behind this context and background, this leads us to 2 very important research questions. Does a community-based service program improve emerging adults' physical and mental health? And if so, will that lead to a reduction in recidivism or criminal activity or new criminal activity relative to the current criminal justice system? We plan on addressing that part using a randomized controlled trial. We also complement this with a process evaluation that will focus on what are some of the features of the programs that are driving these outcomes, how has this program changed over time, and what lessons do we learn from implementation of the program. So in the next few slides, my colleague Emily will introduce the TJ program, and then we're going to discuss some of the details for the RCT, and eventually we'll also hear from Elizabeth, who just launched the program.
Great. So a little bit about the background of the program that we'll be evaluating. The very first step is that defendants are placed into the program. They will receive a needs assessment. And again, this is to try to find those underlying causes that can be contributing to criminal behavior. Is it something like food insecurity, where they're going on and stealing food to account for that? Is it a kind of a lack of employment opportunities? Or is it something like drug addiction that just needs additional treatment? And all those kinds of reasons for an emerging adult to have contact with the criminal justice system. So they'll be conducting this needs assessment, and then it gets reviewed by a case review team. And the case review team is made up of representatives from a wide range of social services, which is housing, transportation, education, employment, and also further experts in fields like mental health, substance use, and public health. And so they'll review the needs assessment, they'll talk to the defendant, and they will find which services are most appropriate. And again, these services would align with what they are experts in, right? So assistance with the health, the education or vocational assistance, housing, and food assistance. It's kind of important to note that one of the goals of the program was to use services that are already part of the community. For our purposes, it's the Williamson County community in Texas. These services were not brought in or specially created for the program. Instead, they already exist in the community, and this kind of builds almost a longer-term sustainable intervention. So after the case review team reviews the needs assessments and talks to the defendant, they create a care plan, which is then also shared with the defendant, and the defendant joins the program and follows the care plan for up to 18 months. The exact time in the program varies based on the defendant's needs. The defendant also gets a case management team for support. So there's continual check-ins, and there's a lot of focus on building longer lasting behavior change outside the program. And so this theory of change model here highlights a lot of what I just said, but it also kind of ties in the outcomes that we expect to see with the program. In the short term, we're looking at improved physical and mental health and decreased rates of recidivism. We're also hoping to see improvement on employment, education outcomes, housing, security outcomes. And then in the long term, this will, all this leads to improved community health and improved health equity. So basically, the Transformative Justice program relies on this integration of community-based services to address the diverse needs of its participants. But what kind of makes it unique is that it's situated in the criminal justice system. Typically, what we see in the criminal justice system is that a lot of this comes down to lawyers. Lawyers are responsible for addressing behavior change in their defendants or linking the defendants to services. But that can only happen if the lawyer knows the defendant needs a certain service and knows about the availability in the community. And so this is kind of a lot to expect, and to have a lawyer trained and have a lot of expertise in this area. So what the program does instead is, while the criminal justice system is still involved in the defendant's case, it also becomes reliant on a team of experts with greater connection to public health and social services in the community. Also, what makes this project unique is the integration of our study. It's a multi-methods approach, starting at the very onset of the program. And like we said, we're doing a randomized control trial and a process evaluation to answer if the program works and how. So I'm going to turn it over to Renee, who's going to start talking about how the study design of the RCT.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I don't know why I keep changing it to be out of presenter mode, but we're back. Thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting the Access to Justice Lab to participate today. We're really excited about this work specifically. Okay, so my role here today is to talk to you about the specifics of the RCT. So we'll go through study eligibility and then also talk about how we anticipate the RCT to process in real life for the participants. First here you'll see we have a discussion of the eligibility and the selection and enrollment process. So study eligibility is based largely on program eligibility, so it mirrors program eligibility, which essentially program eligibility was negotiated with the players in each county, but the goal being that any defendant between the ages of 17 and 24 arrested in the counties with the specific high-level offense would be eligible for the study. So here's where we got to. So that was the start. That's where we started. Here's where we got to. Eligible offenses include nonviolent felony offenses as well as some violent offenses. And the violent offenses are based on the district attorney's discretion based on circumstances and available evidence of the alleged crime. So for example, crimes that are likely eligible are aggravated offenses, assault offenses, offenses with the use of a deadly weapon. Non-eligible offenses can include things that would potentially have the potential to lead to a life sentence. So crimes that have the eligibility for a life sentence, which can include things like murder, indecency that involves a child, or sexual assault. Criminal history can affect eligibility, but only if the offense that exists in the criminal history is an offense that would make the defendant ineligible today. So for example, if somebody potential study participant had a murder in their prior criminal history, that is an offense that would make them, if they had committed that today or were arrested for that charge today, would make them ineligible for the program. That would also make them ineligible for the study and the program today. Those not eligible for the study and the program will be defaulted to the control group. The control group is just processing through the normal criminal justice process. So as if the TJ program didn't exist. Of course, those people not eligible are also not enrolled in the study, so we won't collect data about them. Each eligible defendant, as Emily mentioned, will have the benefit of defense counsel to advise them on both their case as well as participation in the study. So the informed consent process will only take place after the defendant has been fully advised of the components of the study and has the opportunity to consult with counsel privately. So that's a little bit different of what you might typically see in a consent process for a research study. We don't always incorporate the advisement of counsel. That was just a component that seemed very important for this particular population. A program manager for the TJ program will then conduct the informed consent process for the study. So that person will be the individual that goes through the consent process for our study. And it's the defense counsel that will manage just the advisement on the legal issues for the study. Okay, so let's go through the specifics of this RCT. We're going to walk through what the steps look like. The process obviously starts with an arrest. Okay, so once somebody is arrested, a complaint is filed. So the district attorney chooses to file a complaint, to file charges. That's the second step, and then the district attorney will screen for eligibility based on that local criteria. So that means screen for eligibility based upon the charges that we talked about in the prior slide. A competency evaluation is completed, a risk assessment is completed, and a case file is created. All of this happens in order to determine eligibility. So a competency evaluation, for those of you who are not familiar with the criminal justice system, is something that is an evaluation that determines the defendant's capacity to fully understand what's happening to them. If a defendant's determined to not be competent to understand what's happening, they won't be able to complete a fully informed consent, and they'll become ineligible for the study. It's not just a study eligibility issue. Competency is also an issue in the legal field as it relates to being able to understand the severity of the charges being waged against somebody. So that also has an impact on their legal case. A risk assessment is a kind of a standard practice in jurisdictions, and it's essentially a determinant of community safety if the person is released and not held pretrial in detention. So the idea is to understand based on various factors, and there are a number of different risk assessment tools out there that have some differences in what factors they weigh, but it's based on some of those factors determining whether this person poses a community safety issue. So again, if a risk assessment is used and a judge takes the recommendation of that risk assessment, and the risk assessment suggests that this person should not be released into the community, and again, the judge takes the recommendation of that risk assessment, then that person would become ineligible for the program as well. Okay, so the next step is the consent process. After we get through all of that, if the person still remains eligible, they'll meet with the program manager and the defense attorney. During that meeting, a description of the study is provided. This is primarily by the program manager. That description is going to include the voluntary nature of the study, as well as the idea that the defendant can withdraw at any time. Even if they choose today to participate, at any point in time, they're able to withdraw. This is standard practice, as most of you know, for a randomized control trial. The description of the study will also go into detail about the purpose of the study, the length of time the individual is expected to participate. That includes the length of time for data collection. It also talks about we'll also talk with the participant about the data that we will collect, specifically from the agencies that will collect data, as well as what data points we'll be collecting, as well as what they can expect as for survey data. And we'll get to that as well. We're going to talk. We're going to give you an idea of what kind of data we're planning to collect. And then finally, the last thing that will be included in that description is an idea of the incentive structure. So any surveys that we're doing will be incentivized, and so we'll talk to them about that. After that description, the defendant will have the opportunity to meet privately with defense counsel for legal advice. And then if they choose to consent thereafter, we'll go through that whole consent process, which includes a signature on the consent forms and other data collection authorizations. All of that gets transferred to Texas A&M through secure file transfer. Okay. Moving on, after the consent process, again, as is typical in an RCT, we'll go through the randomization process. Randomization will be done through an automatic randomizer. I think George already mentioned that. Remember, the control group is the normal criminal justice process. So as if the TJ program didn't exist, you process through the normal criminal justice process. The treatment is the TJ program itself. For those that are in the control group, the research team will get all of those intake documents we just talked about, but there'll be no involvement from the TJ program at all. The research team will collect data about the person, but they will not interact with the TJ program. For those in the treatment team, we'll get all those intake documents that we talked about. The judge, which in Texas is referred to as the magistrate in this particular type of hearing, and the district attorney will be informed that the person has been randomly assigned to the TJ program. The reason for that is part of the TJ program, participating in the TJ program is a recommendation to the court that then that individual be released on a personal recognizance bond. It's just a recommendation. The judge does not have to grant it. However, the recommendation coming from the district attorney does hold a lot of clout. What that means, a personal recognizance bond, what that means is that the defendant will be recommended to be released without conditions or on their own recognizance. What that means is no bail is required, no electronic monitoring, no ankle bracelet, none of those things that you may typically think of for release pretrial. The ultimate condition is participation fully in the TJ program, but there's no other condition of release. Okay, skipping over the TJ program commencing, you heard George talk about the specifics of the program, so I don't want to go into that more. Elizabeth may be able to talk a little bit about that if you're interested as well. After the TJ program begins and the hope everyone's in their random assignments, data collection will begin for both groups. So this data collection will include collection of administrative data through secure data transfer with agencies that have this data already, as well as collection of survey data through surveys of participants directly, and we'll survey periodically throughout the life of the study. So we'll try to understand the continuum of change by not surveying once or twice, but a few times throughout the study. So the administrative data we're hoping to collect is education and workforce data, health data, and criminal justice data. And then the survey data that we'll primarily collect are health and well-being and social determinant data. With that, I think I'm returning things back to George. Thank you all.
Get there.
Thank you, Renee, and for going over these slides. So I'm going to basically present just a quick summary of what Renee and Emily have mentioned. We basically start with arrest and booking. Initially, there'll be eligibility screening and informed consent counseling. After that, randomization occur, and this is a simple individual randomization of those who are eligible and consented to be part of the study. You end up with a treatment and a control group. The treatment group goes through the phases that both Renee and Emily mentioned. And then the control group will basically proceed with the typical criminal justice system that is current at Williamson County. Hopefully the outcome from the treatment group will be graduation. And if that's the case, the arrest record or the booking record will be completely expunged. So there will be no record of that. Now, we have two primary outcomes of interest. These are recidivism and health outcomes. And we also have secondary outcomes that were mentioned by Renee. Recidivism basically there are several ways of calculating recidivism rates. One of these would be to calculate the rate of getting arrested within a specific period of time. Typically, that's about 6 or 12 months. Other ways of doing so would be to get arrested while having a pending, getting arrested on a different charge while having a pending case. The plan is to calculate all sorts of different recidivism rate and track these over time. In terms of health outcomes, we will, as Renee mentioned, we will be collecting quarterly surveys, starting with a baseline survey. And those surveys will be conducted using basically a web app or a web link and or a phone survey. This is mainly to make sure that we capture as many as people and do not have a high rate of attrition. We will be using the SF-12 survey. Now, other potential outcomes include, as mentioned, employment, education attainment, and housing. In terms of the sources of the data, for the recidivism, this is going to come from the administrative case data from the county, the criminal justice system. These would be basically all information about each case and each participant or each defendant since the arrest, and we will also get historical criminal data, so past 2 or 3 years before that arrest event. In terms of health data, there's a monetary incentive, again, hopefully to minimize attrition rates and increase compliance. So we end up with $15 gift cards for agreeing to participate at baseline, and then eventually collect, initial survey within 5 days of the arrest, and then a quarterly survey for up to 2 years. For each completion, the participant will receive a $15, and that's the case for both the treatment and the control. Now, some of the other secondary outcomes that we are interested in would be, for instance, healthcare utilization. We're hoping to track, number of ER visits, for instance, and capture those. Employment and educational success, such as completion of GED. We're currently in discussion with different organizations and entities to acquire such the administrative data and be able to merge them with the criminal justice data and our survey data. Now, in terms of analysis, we talked a lot about RCT, and in terms of what we plan to do with the data once we collect it, we're going to basically use the RCT to our advantage and look at first at the differences between the outcomes, whether primary or secondary, across groups, mainly by computing the average treatment effect. We plan on doing this through a combination of methods. The first one would be an assignment mechanism-based test, such as permutation and comparison of means. The other one would be just a simple multivariate or an OLS regression that allows us to control for covariates. I mean, the benefits from using permutation test, for instance, it allows us to avoid assumptions regarding functional form and outcome distribution. However, we may have a cost of losing some sort of a precision in terms of the measures. To increase that precision, we will rely on the second approach. And although it does require some assumptions on the functional form and distribution, but it allows us to increase the precision by controlling for powerful covariates such as the case characteristics and defendant characteristics. And also at the same time, this is a very transient population. There's a lot of homelessness. We may lose contact information, so we do worry about attrition, and attrition could be a real concern. So we plan on through monetary incentives to minimize the attrition rates, but also at the back end we'll try to construct multiple imputed data sets and hopefully implement some sort of a bounds to address this attrition. Now we move on now to discuss the process evaluation with Emily, and eventually we're going to hear also from Elizabeth about the program.
Thank you. So while the RCT portion, allows us to kind of compare the intervention to the current criminal justice system, the process evaluation phase of the study will allow us to compare the intervention to itself over time. So with the process evaluation, we want to understand from the stakeholders who are most involved in the project, what factors do they feel are most associated with the outcomes? and kind of how has the system changed over time. So for the next few months, we're going to collect data in a couple different ways. First, we'll of course do a document analysis where we review the care plans, case management notes, and any kind of program notes or logs that document what's going on in the program. We'll also do semi-structured interviews or focus groups with all the different stakeholders that are involved in this program, everyone from program staff, attorneys, case managers, service providers, and even the participants themselves. And then if we can and is appropriate, we'll observe case review meetings and kind of other proceedings just to understand how the process is functioning. We're going to do that over the next few months, and then we are going to repeat all of this again around the same time next year, all in an attempt to answer kind of a variety of questions about the study. So what are the most effective services or program elements according to stakeholders? What are the gaps in services? How do they just feel about the program and their thoughts about what it attempts to achieve over time? How has the program evolved? Are things like the decision-making or the service provision process, have they changed, and how so? And finally, kind of what is the connection between the program and the community? Do we see an effect on the criminal justice system or other systems in the community? So we're going to synthesize all of these results to identify some successes and challenges, and of course develop recommendations for the program going forward and any other communities that are interested in a program such as this. So our research team is very well diverse in disseminating research through things like reports, briefs, articles, and presentations. I think I can speak for all of us when I say we're very excited about this kind of cross-disciplinary approach and getting to share, you know, what's unique to our discipline with other disciplines. But then we also want to partner with our program representatives at TJ so we can translate findings into reports or presentations that are most useful to them. So what we found is across our state, there has been some policymakers and other organizations that support criminal justice and health innovation that are very interested in how the study is going forward. We believe that this kind of interest will remain throughout the program and the study implementation. So we're really interested in finding ways to disseminate findings in the most effective way possible, right? To get it to the audiences that are most interested in these results. So we're very open to how we share all of our results. So as kind of mentioned in the beginning, we are at the very, very early stages of the study. The program itself just launched at the end of September, and I know Elizabeth can speak a little bit more about that. From what I understand, they're enrolling participants slowly as they refine all their processes. We on the study team are wrapping up kind of our planning phase where we're finalizing instruments and our data collection approaches. Once we get the last little step of IRB approval, we're really excited to be jumping forward into the study. So that's kind of our, details about where we're at on the program or in the research phase. I think we want to turn it over to Elizabeth.
Yes, hi everybody. So I think it's helpful probably to understand from a community perspective what it means to launch a program contemporaneously with launching what is obviously, I'm sure to everyone, an incredibly complex research objective. So I thought I would just provide a little bit of feedback on that experience from my end with hopes that it sort of foretells what will hopefully be our outcomes at the end. So one of the things that I think is really unique about this evaluation and launching a program is that we were able to work really closely with the team to design the framework of intake for our participants to accommodate this research design. And so that has actually been required. It's been really interesting as the research team has talked to different partners to explain that you must design a program that intakes in a way that accommodates this randomized control trial evaluation, because it's almost impossible in the criminal justice system because of constitutional requirements to pull back services and then allocate who receives those services differently later. And so we have had to, really design the program along with the evaluation. And I think that there have been, inherent challenges to that, which is convincing criminal justice stakeholders that they are comfortable with not holding all decision making about assignment into a program within their discretion. So both judges and district attorneys who, traditionally are the exclusive decision makers, convincing them that they should, really allow for a randomization to decide entry and exit into a program has been an evolving challenge. And we were lucky enough to get, Williamson County's district attorney and judges very quickly to see the benefits of the evaluation and outcome measurements, and that they were willing to, cede their discretion over to this randomization process. And so there is incredible amounts of collaboration that has had to go between our program, between understanding how the evaluation impacts program design. And that's been really successful. And I'm, happy to report that we now are already in our program launch since the end of September. We are running the randomization. We're just not randomizing, meaning we have the entire intake process already flowing in the way that is anticipated by the randomized control. It's just that we're obviously only intaking those who we choose to intake rather than assigning people to a study and then intaking, but the actual process and framework and mechanism is in place. And I think having a, slow launch has given us time to modify that in a way that makes most sense. So we're really, really excited about it. We think that the outcomes that will come from this research study will be transformative, not only for our local community, but statewide. It will very much influence how policy proceeds with criminal justice reform, I think statewide and potentially nationally. So we're really excited about it. And with that, I'll hand it back to George.
All right. So thank you everyone for being here. And I think this covers basically what we are doing in terms of the project and give you basically a status update on where we stand. If we have any questions, I guess we're ready to answer these.
Fantastic. Yeah. So we are at the question and answer portion of today's webinar. Let me encourage you, those who are with us on the webinar today, if you have a question you'd like to ask, and you're with us on the web portion of today's webinar, you should see a Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen in the middle. You can click on that and type in your question, and we'll be entertaining as many as we can get to, today. Just to get us started, I might take the moderator's prerogative and ask a question. So this is really a fascinating study, and congratulations on all the hard work and creativity that's gone into the design of both the intervention as well as the rigorous mixed method approaches to evaluating the program. One of the, I think, concerns that are pretty global in the kind of work that we do in trying to connect health and social systems like this is that the possibility that there may be inadequate capacity in some of the sectors that we're trying to connect to actually serve and meet the needs of the population we're trying to address. In your case, you're dealing with justice-involved emerging adults, and in the intervention group, presumably you'll be the case managers will be identifying unmet health and social needs and working to navigate those individuals into services. What ability do you have in your study to look at whether there's adequate capacity in the community to meet those needs and whether those needs actually get met? Some of these services like housing are notoriously, demand far exceeds supply. There can be waiting lists and other kinds of issues. So any comments on those issues?
I don't know if Elizabeth, are you still with us?
I am.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about your thoughts from the program perspective, and we can add in on the study?
Yeah, absolutely. It's an excellent question. In fact, it is that gap in service that motivated the design of this program, because what we wanted to do was to make the case that if we did invest in community based alternatives to incarceration, that they were more effective, and hopefully long-term talk about funding shift. So that's what our stakeholders have entered into this, design to do, is to sort of compare systems. So one is, I think there are going to be service gaps. We will be tracking that every single time we identify a need that it's unable to meet. We're tracking how long it takes us to meet that gap, whether we're ultimately successful to meet that gap. And then, of course, the randomized control allows us to say, even with those gaps, do we still outperform the traditional system, right? And hopefully make the case that we should just be filling the gaps within communities rather than relying upon a criminal justice system to serve as a replacement for inadequate sourcing in the community. And then I think lastly, the program, as program designers, we have worked extraordinarily well to increase capacity to address as many needs as we can. So one of the things that the program has done is to solicit funding specific to this population and specific to this program, so that we have actually expanded capacity within the within the community for the lifetime of this evaluation, again, in order to demonstrate what is possible when we invest in communities over incarceration.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Sounds like you've got a very deliberate approach for studying and navigating those issues. So we've got a number of questions from participants on the webinar. First up, a question about the question is that for many of the conditions, for example, substance use disorder, the treatment will need to be specific for each patient or client.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, how are you able to ensure that the approach is not a one-size-fits-all kind of intervention, but there's really the appropriate level of tailoring that's happening for each client?
Yeah. Do you guys mind if I take this one too? So this is this is really exciting. So the way that this works is somewhat, once people enter the program, we do a needs assessment. I see the next question. So our needs assessment that we're using is a modified YASI. So those who understand the youth assessment, we've modified it to reach young adults based upon an index of need we created with Vanessa's team. And we're working, I can talk about that process extensively on another call. But we do the needs assessment, and then what happens is that is sent over to a case management team who creates an individualized care plan. And the individualized care plan is brought to a multidisciplinary team that is composed of service providers across sectors. So we have a doctor, mental health provider, housing provider, peer support provider, substance use treatment provider, all who literally sit around a physical table once a week and address what the results of the needs assessment are, and then tailor a response plan that adequately addresses the diagnosed needs. As participants proceed through the program and behavior either escalates or is not being met, each participant then receives a specific behavioral intervention plan that is also designed by that care team, and the behavioral intervention plan specifically targets behavior that arises and creates interventions to respond to the behavior as it moves through. So it is by design individualized. We then have checks and balances within the design. So there is a external leadership team that comes in and audits our actual county team. So I'm on the leadership team. I come in and audit the county team as they go through to make sure that we continue to have fidelity to the model. And then we have fidelity in data collection monitored as well throughout the process, so that, in the event that we start to deviate from that, we're able to correct quite quickly.
Great, fantastic. And maybe a somewhat related question, a question about the case manager, that position that's used in your study. Can you tell us more about that position? both not only kind of what they do, but also maybe what kind of skills they have in terms of training and yeah, to play that role?
So we actually have multiple case managers. So we have a lead case manager assigned to the county. In Williamson County, the lead case manager is an LCSW with a background in mental health for young adults. So it is a specific, the way that our program works is it is actually an employee of the local mental health authority who has experience both in counseling as well as just general case management and coordination and assessment. We then have specific case managers that serve under that lead case manager that are assigned with particularized skill sets. So we have a juvenile services officer who has been serving within a juvenile system and is now working with our participants to encourage behavioral change. And so our especially high risk folks may be assigned to that case manager because he has worked with folks who have actually experienced, for instance, assaultive behavior and therefore has particular skills in that area. We also have case managers that come from a background of employment. So it's one of our employment partners, and that case manager is particularly well suited for working with individuals whose largest identifying need is career readiness as an alternative to poverty. So the times that poverty is creating criminal justice behavior, they may work particularized with that. So there's a lead case manager, and then there are individual case managers that can be assigned based upon the primary need being identified. And then that lead case manager, again, assures fidelity of the model throughout all case management services.
Fantastic. Thank you. And then the question, I think the question is asking for maybe if you could provide more information about how your study team actually accesses and interacts with the participants, I guess, at the first point of contact, how you actually how your study team gets inside the justice system to actually access the justice involved emerging adults to assess and then consent and potentially enroll them in the program.
Would it be helpful for me? Go ahead, George.
Well, no, Elizabeth, I think it might be actually helpful for you to
Maybe she can do the lead and then we can jump in again.
Yeah, so our director is sort of the research, initial intake person. So the director for our program, and again, we could have an entire discussion about what it took to get research teams into jails. But so we have an agreement with the sheriff in Williamson County that our research team literally got a badge that allows them to, once we are notified by the assistant district attorney that someone is eligible for the TJ program, our director goes in and meets in a private confidential room, provides them the is able to meet with them, converse with them about the fact of what the study is, how they're going to proceed. Our director then leaves and the defense counsel comes in and provides confidential consultation on whether or not this is appropriate for their given criminal justice history, and also just, generally to give them advice about whether or not it is a particularly wise decision to enter into the study for them. So it's very individualized advice. And then our director actually comes back and says, would you like to enter the study? That's at which point the randomization occurs. So it's actually occurring within the jail in a confidential suite that we set up that allows them to have, the ability to converse with folks within the booking area of the jail. So it's actually within booking. And traditionally what we have been seeing as we've been doing the slow rollout is we are there within usually, 6 hours of arrest. We're usually able to get in and actually get folks there. And so we're processing them, hours before they even hit the magistrate's office for consideration of bail or bond. I hope that answers that.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. Another question about the design, asking about for participants who are randomized to the control arm of the study, so they're not getting the transformative justice intervention. Is that group eventually given an opportunity to enroll in the program? Is there any kind of crossover element to this design?
I mean, as of now, they are not given an opportunity to enroll in the TJ program, although this is typically the case whenever you have an RCD, and for fairness purposes, you end up offering the opportunity for those in the control group to enroll in the treatment group. But the issue here is that by the time the enrollment goes through, most of those in the control group will probably have their cases maybe disposed by the traditional criminal justice system at Williamson County.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think just to add, also our model requires assignment to the program pretty quickly after arrest, due to the fact that that's a, as from behavioral change, a turning point towards behavioral change. So it's incredibly difficult to assign someone later into the program. It would actually impact the fidelity of the model.
Fantastic. And we've got a question about data. You did mention data from a number of different sources, and then potentially tapping into administrative data from healthcare and employment and educational sources. Are you using any kind of specific type of platform for data management and integrating data across the different sources and systems that you're interfacing with?
So we are, and it's super exciting. So we are using a system developed by the patient care, PCIC, patient care. I'm terrible with acronyms, but it's a nonprofit offshoot of Baylor Medical School that created a case management system that is designed to integrate multidisciplinary care across criminal, health, and mental health service providers. And so that case management system allows us to provide multidisciplinary care where everyone on the care team is accessing the same data. And it's set up to be a values-based case management system, meaning that it highlights throughout the program the values and outcomes and goals of our participants. And we're able to collect it that way, and then keep sort of fastidious notes. And then, as I mentioned, we audit data collection on that end. And then, of course, the research team would certainly do that as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Question about 17-year-olds. Are they being charged as adults if they're enrolled in your program, or are they in the juvenile system?
They are adults. Texas is now one of 3 states that still consider 17-year-olds adults. They are the age of majority for the adult criminal justice system.
Fantastic. Thank you for clarifying. And then a final question. Question about incentives. Are there any incentives that your study is using that aren't monetary? I guess incentives for participation in the study.
Not for the control group. The control group would basically receive monetary incentives to perform to complete the survey and the baseline survey and then the quarterly survey. Yeah.
Great, fantastic. Well, I know we are just about out of time. Let me again thank this fantastic research team and the panelists that joined us today for giving us an in-depth look at your study at the early stages. Let me encourage the audience to stay tuned to this our systems for action webinar, because we will hear from the study team again later on in the progress of the study to find out about what they're learning about implementation and impact as this study moves forward. Of course, we do this webinar about every 2 weeks, so make sure to tune to upcoming webinars. Our next one will be on October 23rd. Looking at another one of our newer studies focusing on seniors and connecting them to nutrition support through managed care. Again, we have an open call for new research studies proposals that is open until November 6th. So if you've got an idea for an innovative system alignment strategy that can be studied rigorously, we would love to get a proposal from you. Go to the website, systemforaction.org, click on the funding tab, and you can access more information about the call for proposals. We encourage you to apply. Also, a recording of this webinar will be posted as usual on our website shortly after the session today. And so if you've got colleagues who weren't able to be with us, or you'd like to go back and hear some more, hear some of the work again, You can access the recording and slides on the Systems for Action website. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at future events of our program, and we wish you a productive rest of your day. Thank you so much.